I just asked how much it cost, she whispered, standing frozen in the middle of a luxury car showroom. Her voice wasn't loud, but the room had gone silent enough for everyone to hear. The salesman, dressed in a sharp gray suit and a smug expression, raised an eyebrow and chuckled. "Ma'am, this isn't the grocery store. These vehicles start at $300,000, he said, loud enough for others to hear. A couple nearby looked over, smirking. One staff member even let out a quiet laugh. Her fingers clutched her purse a little tighter. She didn't argue. She didn't even blink. Just nodded softly, turned around, and walked toward the exit, her simple sandals making soft sounds against the marble floor. But what no one noticed was the silent camera fixed in the top right corner of the ceiling, recording everything, including the insult, including the humiliation, and especially the man who gave it. Outside, she stood for a moment near the glass door, staring at the reflection of the shining cars behind her. Her eyes didn't have tears. They had something colder, something that didn't forget. That night, she didn't sleep. Not because of the insult, but because of the silence. The kind of silence that only a woman feels when the world decides her worth based on her clothes. And the silence before a storm. Because the next morning, before the showroom even opened properly, a black Rolls-Royce Phantom pulled up at the entrance. Shiny, spotless, and with a private plate that read SRA1. The valet, confused, rushed toward it, but the back door opened before he could touch the handle. A tall man stepped out, dressed in all black, calm, but with eyes that didn't miss a thing. He glanced once at the dealership logo, then at the door, and said one sentence to his driver that would flip the entire story on its head. "Wait here. This won't take long." The manager was just stepping out with his morning coffee when he noticed the Rolls-Royce. His pace slowed, eyes narrowing as he saw the man walking in, composed, confident, and far from ordinary. The same salesman from yesterday was already inside, joking with a couple near the counter. He didn't look up until the door chimed. And then his smile faded. The man walked straight up to him, didn't greet, didn't smile, just placed a small black card on the desk. "You remember her?" he asked. The salesman stared at the card, confused. On it was the woman's name. Sarah R. Ahmed, and below it, written in gold letters, Founder, SRA Group International. The man leaned in. "Yesterday, you told her she couldn't afford floor mats. Today she could buy this entire building in cash, but she won't, because some things aren't worth saving." By now, the entire showroom had gone quiet. The same people who had laughed yesterday were standing still, some pretending to be busy, others just watching. "I'm her husband," he continued, voice low but firm, "and she didn't cry last night, she didn't scream, she didn't even tell me what happened." He turned slightly, now speaking loud enough for everyone to hear. "But you see, sometimes a silence can be louder than a slap." The salesman's mouth moved, but no words came out. His hands trembled slightly as he tried to speak, but the man cut him off. "Don't. She doesn't want an apology. She wanted respect. But clearly that's not something you sell here." With that, he turned to leave, but not before the manager rushed over, stumbling on his words, asking if they'd reconsider. The man stopped, looked him in the eye, and said, "Tell your staff that judging someone by their clothes can cost you more than just a sale. It can cost you your name." Then he walked out, leaving behind silence, shame, and a lesson none of them would forget. The moment he stepped out of the showroom, the silence he left behind was louder than anything he said. But outside, something unexpected happened. A small group of customers had gathered near the parking lot. Some curious about the luxury car, others just intrigued by the tension in the air, and standing near the driver's side of the Rolls-Royce was her. Sarah. Same jeans, same plain white kurta. But something had changed. She wasn't looking down this time. Her eyes were up, steady, watching the glass doors as if she already knew what had happened inside. When he reached her, she didn't say a word. He just opened the door for her like he always did. But before stepping in, she turned, not to look at her husband, but toward the showroom. She held that stare for a few seconds, as if silently reminding every eye watching that dignity isn't stitched into fabric. It's carried in silence. Inside the car, she finally broke the quiet. "You didn't have to come," she said softly. "I know," he replied, not looking at her but at the road ahead. "But they had to know who you are." Her fingers traced the edge of her phone, still trembling slightly. "What if they still think I'm nothing without you?" He turned his head then, finally meeting her eyes. "Then they're blind, and blind people don't deserve your light." A long pause followed. Not heavy, just full of the things they never said out loud. After a while, she smiled, the kind of smile that carries both pain and pride. "You know I wasn't upset they insulted me," she whispered. "I was upset that I froze, that I didn't say anything back." He nodded. "You didn't need to. You walked away. That was your power. And today, you showed them what walking away really means." But just as the car rolled forward, something happened that neither of them expected. The same salesman came rushing out the door, running toward the car, waving both hands. "Wait, please, just a minute." The driver looked back, waiting for a sign. Sarah raised her hand gently. "No," she said. "Keep driving." But her eyes stayed locked on the mirror as the man's figure grew smaller. Not out of revenge, not out of pride, but because some doors, once closed, don't need to open again, especially when the world behind them finally sees what it lost. By the time they reached their home, a quiet estate nestled behind rows of flowering trees, Sarah still hadn't spoken again. But her silence wasn't heavy anymore. It was reflective, like the calm after a storm you've survived with your spine straight. As the car pulled through the grand gate, she looked out at the gardeners, the staff, the life she had built over the years, all of it earned through late nights, rejected deals, and 100 boardroom battles where she had to prove herself twice, for every once a man had to. Her husband gently squeezed her hand, as if he knew the thoughts crossing her mind. He did. He always had. Later that evening, she sat at her study table with a pen and a thick, leather-bound journal. It was something she hadn't touched in months. The journal she used to write in during her hardest years, back when even affording bus fare was a question mark. She flipped to the last page she had written. A tear slid down her cheek as she read her own handwriting. "One day I'll walk into rooms that once laughed at me, and they'll fall silent, not because I changed, but because they never saw me to begin with." That sentence had felt like hope once. Now it felt like prophecy fulfilled. She closed the journal and picked up her phone. No social media post, no dramatic announcement, just a message to the dealership's board of directors. A message not filled with anger, but with clarity. She didn't ask for an apology. She didn't threaten lawsuits. Instead, she requested a meeting. Not to punish, but to prevent, to make sure what happened to her wouldn't happen to another girl who walked in wearing old jeans and ambition. The next morning, she stood at the same glass door of the dealership. But this time, she wasn't a customer. She wasn't even there to buy. She was there as a guest speaker, a respected entrepreneur invited by the board to lead a training on class bias and customer respect. The same staff who once laughed now sat in neat rows, notebooks in hand, eyes fixed on her as she walked up to the front. Her voice didn't shake. It didn't need to. "Yesterday I walked in here looking like someone you could ignore," she began. "Today, I'm here to teach you why that will never happen again, not just for me, but for anyone who dares to dream without dressing the part." A few eyes lowered. A few stayed locked on her, ashamed but curious. And somewhere in the back, the salesman who had mocked her watched silently, his face unreadable. She looked around the room one more time, then smiled. Respect isn't about money. It's about humanity. And if you wait until someone proves their worth to treat them like a person, then maybe it's not them who doesn't belong here, it's you. The room fell silent again. But this time, it wasn't from arrogance. It was from impact. She had come full circle, not just proving a point, but planting one deep enough to grow into change. And as she stepped down from the podium, the applause wasn't loud. It was slow, steady, and sincere. Because sometimes, the loudest power isn't in raising your voice. It's in refusing to lower your worth. As she exited the hall, the same salesman who once humiliated her stood quietly near the side wall. He looked like a man who had just watched the ground shift beneath him. She didn't notice him at first. But when their eyes met, he stepped forward, hesitant, like someone walking toward their own reflection for the first time. "Ma'am, I just wanted to say—" he began, but she gently raised her hand. Not to stop him, but to slow him down. "I don't need an apology," she said calmly. "I just hope you see people differently now." His mouth opened to respond, but nothing came out. Not because he didn't have words, but because for the first time, maybe words weren't enough. He gave a slight nod, stepped back, and watched her leave again. Only this time she wasn't walking away in silence. She was walking away having changed something, not just in the room, but in the man himself. On the drive back home, she scrolled through her inbox and found dozens of emails pouring in. News of her speech had started spreading online. Clips were being shared, people were tagging her, and one message stood out from a young girl. "Today I walked into a fancy store, scared they'd judge me. But then I remembered you. I walked taller." "Thank you." Sarah stared at that message for a long time. Not because it shocked her, but because it proved something she always believed. When you rise with grace, you pull others up with you. That night, as she sat across from her husband at dinner, there was a calm between them. A quiet celebration. No champagne, no toasts, just peace. The kind that comes from knowing you didn't fight back to win. You fought back to heal. "You know," he said while sipping his tea, "you've done more with one speech than most do with their careers." She chuckled. "I didn't give a speech. I just told the truth." And just as the night was winding down, her phone buzzed again. This time, it was a call from a major international company inviting her to speak at their annual conference on equality and dignity in the workplace. The irony? One of their sponsors was the luxury car brand from the very dealership she had been kicked out of. She smiled, shook her head, and whispered to herself, "Full circle. Again." But perhaps the most unexpected twist came 2 weeks later. A letter arrived at her doorstep. Handwritten. No sender name on the front. Inside it read, "Sometimes it takes one person's strength to reveal another's weakness. Thank you for not yelling. Thank you for showing me who I could have been. I've resigned from my job. I'm going back to school. Maybe someday I'll be someone worthy of serving people like you. Not because you're rich, but because you taught me what richness really means." There was no signature. But she didn't need one. She folded the letter slowly, her eyes misty, and placed it inside her journal, right behind the page where she once promised herself to rise above. Because in that moment, she knew. The story wasn't just about a car, or a man, or even revenge. It was about a woman who walked in with nothing but self-respect and walked out having changed everything without ever needing to raise her voice. Months passed, but the ripples of that one day never stopped. Sarah's story had gone viral, not because it was flashy or dramatic, but because it struck a nerve deep in society. Major news outlets covered it. Influencers talked about it. Millions saw a simple truth reflected in her experience. Too many people are judged by how they look before anyone bothers to ask who they are. And while most stories online fade within days, hers stuck. Not because she fought with fury, but because she led with dignity. One day she was invited to a televised panel alongside CEOs, activists, and public figures. The topic: discrimination in elite spaces. As the cameras rolled, the host turned to her. "Sarah, you're not an actress, not a celebrity, and yet your story is reaching millions. Why do you think that is?" She paused, looked into the lens, and replied, "Because I didn't do anything special. I just walked into a room expecting to be treated like a human being. And when I wasn't, I left with my head high instead of lowering my worth." The applause wasn't scripted. It came naturally, like something people had been holding in for too long. That night, her inbox flooded with messages from hotel clerks, waitresses, janitors, even students, all with the same story in different words. "I saw myself in you." Meanwhile, the dealership that once dismissed her found itself under public pressure. The company released a formal apology and announced a national campaign to retrain its employees on class sensitivity and human respect. But behind closed doors, something even more surprising happened. The very board that had ignored her before now offered her a seat among them, not just as a PR move, but as a consultant on corporate culture. It wasn't revenge, it was poetic justice. She didn't accept immediately. She took time, made them wait. Because this time, she was the one interviewing them. When she finally did return to the dealership, it wasn't through the customer entrance. She walked in through the staff hallway, where a new poster had been placed on the wall. It showed her photograph next to her quote, "Never let a suit or a smile make you forget who deserves respect." A young employee passed by and whispered, "That quote. It's why I applied to work here." Sarah just smiled, then stepped into the boardroom. Everyone stood to greet her. The same room that once wouldn't have looked twice at her now waited in silence for her to speak. And when she did, she didn't lecture or scold. She simply said, "Let's talk about how we treat people when no one's watching. That's where real reputation lives." And as the meeting began, one thing was clear. She hadn't just rewritten her own story. She had rewritten the rules. A week later, Sarah received an invitation that left her speechless. It came from the very car manufacturer who had once scoffed at her. They wanted her to attend the unveiling of their newest model, not just as a guest, but as the keynote speaker for the event. The irony was undeniable, but she knew this was a unique opportunity, not to prove anything, but to send a message that when we rise above adversity, we can transform even the most arrogant places into spaces for real change. On the day of the event, Sarah arrived early. The grand hall was filled with the usual crowd, industry moguls, journalists, and influencers. But when she walked in, the atmosphere shifted. People stared, not because she was out of place, but because they could see that her presence was one of power. She wasn't just there to witness history, she was there to make it. The event began with speeches from the usual suspects, people with polished words and rehearsed smiles. But when Sarah took the stage, something changed. The room fell silent, not because of her fame or wealth, but because they understood she was someone who had earned her place through every struggle, every battle, every unspoken word. She didn't need a title or a suit. Her strength spoke for itself. "I stand before you today," Sarah began, her voice clear and steady, "not because of what I've achieved in the luxury business, but because of what I've learned about people. How we treat each other when we think no one is watching. How we define success not by what we own, but by how we lift others." She paused for a moment, letting her words settle in. "Today, I'm not here to talk about cars. I'm here to talk about respect. The kind that can't be bought, the kind that doesn't care if you're wearing jeans or a tailored suit. And I'm here to remind you all that true luxury isn't about what you drive. It's about how you make others feel." The crowd was silent, but it was a different kind of silence, the kind that comes when people begin to realize they've been living by the wrong rules. As Sarah finished her speech, she could see the shift in their eyes. The applause wasn't loud, but it was heartfelt. She had done something no one could have predicted. She had taken a space built on judgment and transformed it into one of reflection. Later that evening, as she sat in a quiet corner of the after-party, her husband by her side, she received another message. This one wasn't from a corporation or a fan. It was from the salesman, the one who had mocked her all those months ago. "Sarah, I don't expect you to forgive me, but I want to thank you. You taught me what it really means to treat people with dignity. I've started volunteering at a local shelter. I don't know if I'll ever be as strong as you, but I'm trying to be a better man." Sarah stared at the message for a moment, letting the weight of it sink in. She wasn't just changing systems or businesses. She was changing hearts. As the night wound down, she stood and looked around the room. The lavish decorations, the glittering chandeliers, the champagne glasses raised in celebration, all of it seemed so much less important now. What truly mattered, she realized, wasn't the luxury surrounding her. It was the quiet, unseen power of kindness, the kind that could make the world feel like a place where respect was the real luxury. And as she left the event, her footsteps echoed in the silent hallway. She had entered the world of the rich and powerful, but in the end, it was her humanity, not her wealth, that had earned her the most valuable thing of all, the respect of others.